So today we're going to talk about sleep learning and memory, and we are going to kind of start out with a review to remind you some of the core concepts and definitions because it might have been a little bit of time since you've taken a similar class. So the purpose of today, the outline, what we're going to cover is first we're going to review some of those basic concepts that you might have learned even back in Psychology 101. We're going to talk about sleep and memory in general, along with the types of memory. We're going to talk about memory consolidation, what it is, and then how it relates to sleep. Then we're going to cover a theory called active systems consolidation theory. It's one of two theories that explains potentially why during sleep we experience these memory related processes. I'm not going to cover the second theory. I'm just going to cover active systems theory, and then I'm going to show you guys some evidence in a 2015 study of why the active systems consolidation theory might actually be true. And then we're going to talk very briefly on some unresolved questions. Even after all of these theories and ideas that we have, we still have some things that we don't really understand in terms of sleep learning and memory. So just a kind of a quick overview of things that you might already know, but just a good reminder. So the definition of memory, right? So memory, this is information that you keep in your brain's neuronal networks. It helps to regulate individual behavior. It helps you to adapt to changing environmental demands. And learning is the acquisition of new memory. Now, we're going to talk about the process of memory and the three sub-processes in just a minute. But remembering these core concepts is important because we're going to be talking a lot about basically the more intricate processes of learning and memory. Now, when it comes to sleep, we know that there's a different threshold in terms of sensory input, and that's different from wakefulness. So when we are asleep, obviously our threshold is different in terms of sensory information in, visual, auditory, tactile information. That threshold is higher because we don't want the person to wake up, right? So we want them to have less reaction to the environment around them, whereas when you're awake, you tend to have a lower threshold. You can hear and see and experience the environment differently. And that is what we typically see with sleep versus wakefulness. When you're awake, only some of the information that you're going to experience throughout the day is going to be encoded, and we're going to talk about this process in a minute, or translated into relevant memories, simply because you just get so much information on a second to second, minute to minute basis that you just can't fit it all. And there's not really a point to. You don't need to, because it's not relevant to your survival. So remembering what a sweater a person wore 3 months ago in your bio class is not really relevant to your survival. So that's not something that you likely will recall or encode even in the first place. You might not have even noticed it long enough to even encode it into a very short-term memory. That is just something that you will not keep. And so this process is looking at a very small portion of what you experience actually encoding into memory. And then we know that sleep plays a critical role in both learning and memory consolidation, and here we're going to talk today about how this is. So if you've taken any kind of memory class like learning and memory, even Psychology 101, cognitive psychology, you might be familiar with these sub-processes of memory. So the first one, and we can look at this in kind of a stepwise fashion or a stage fashion, is the first step is encoding, right? So this is that initial representation. It's a conversion of information into a language that your brain can understand. So, right, so light waves get translated into through your retina, through your eye, information that your brain can understand. It's a conversion piece. And so to start with, before you can have a memory, you have to have this encoding process. So this is also considered learning, right? So that first step is learning and encoding. And then consolidation is where we see that this information is stabilized and then integrated into pre-existing information in your brain. The consolidation is what I like to call kind of like a concreting, right, of that information, a stabilization and concreting it into your brain. And then finally, you have retrieval, which is stored information that's recalled. And if you have any kind of disease or disorder where you have an issue with any one of these, you're going to have problems with memory. So you can maybe encode it, but you can't consolidate it. Well, if you can't consolidate it, then it doesn't get concreted and you can't retrieve it. Let's say you can encode it and you can consolidate it, but you can't retrieve it because it is sort of lost in the brain somewhere. So these are very important sub-processes of memory, and we need to have all of them intact in order for things to work properly. Now, when it comes to sleep and wake, generally speaking, so this is sort of general information, we know that when you sleep, after you encode information, okay, it's going to enhance consolidation and enhance your ability to recall that information. So you might even have professors tell you that it's good to study and then take a nap. We know that when you give yourself that time to sleep and consolidate, you're going to have better retrieval when you wake up, okay, of that information. Some people even say that when they go to bed, they run things through their mind, and then when they wake up, they feel like it's stronger, more strengthened. We know that sleep before you learn can help you encode better as well. So not only sleeping after you've encoded information, but getting a good night's sleep before you do a learning activity can help you code more efficiently. So when we think about this, we think about like, okay, let's say you have a big final coming up. Really the best thing for you to do is to get a good night's sleep prior to your study. Maybe you have a few days set out to study. Getting good rest on those days is going to help you encode the information better. And then, napping after you have had a study session, or getting a good night's sleep after the study session as well, is going to help you do better. Now, we know that wake supports that encoding and retrieval information, and specifically sleep supports consolidation. We're going to see in a few minutes that there is some consolidation that might happen when you're awake, but that's just a different mechanism, a different process, and we're not going to go into detail about that. But specifically, I want you to think about how wake is part of the encoding and retrieval, because this is where you're exposed to the information. This is where you're going to retrieve the information, and then sleep is supporting that consolidation. And here it's just kind of listed out as kind of a graphic. If you encode information and then you go to sleep and get a good night's sleep, you're going to consolidate that. That memory is going to then really concrete, so that the next day you're going to recall that information better. And then on the other side of that, when you get a good night's sleep, that's going to help you encode that information better right here. And then you're going to be more efficient at that than if you get a good night's sleep, and then you're going to concrete it better, and then you're going to recall better. And it's just a constant cycle that, getting a good night's sleep is going to help you continue on that particular cycle of good encoding, efficient recall, and things like that. So let's talk a little bit about different types of memory. You might have, recognized some of these terms. This is great because this is something that, you see time and time again. So declarative memory that you can declare, right? This would include memories about yourself, which is episodic memory. So this might be episodes of your life where you think about the time that you, maybe there was a wedding that you went to, right? And so this is any information about that sort of episode. Think of it almost like a video of your experience, right? And it can contain something called autobiographical information, which is information about yourself, but this is just generally what you experience in life. Think of it of like episodes of your life. And then semantic information is factual information, right? So this is like, who is the president? What year is it? What state do you live in? This is a lot of times what people study for tests, is this factual information, this semantic information. And so this is what falls into this category called declarative. So this is declarative memory. And it's a big category. And there's a lot other types of memory, but we're not going to go into all of that today. We're just going to focus mostly on declarative versus episodic and semantic in declarative, and then declarative versus non-declarative. Now, non-declarative is a slightly smaller category. It has other things, but we're going to focus on these procedural, perceptual, and motor skills. So this would be, and this little, graphic here is like maybe you went to a dance, right? And that would be something that you would remember for episodic memory. For non-declarative memory, this is stuff that you really can't declare. You really can't put in words, okay? So for example, when you're riding a bike, if you describe an instance where you rode a bike, maybe you even remember the first time you learned how to ride a bike, that would be declarative memory. That would be episodic, okay? And even autobiographical. If you're trying to describe the process of how you get on the bike, how you ride it, and then thinking about it's not muscle memory, but almost like muscle memory that you would think of how you balance on a bike. Just because you describe the process to a person's not going to be able to get on a bike and ride it, okay? So your ability to ride a bike, to be able to balance and be able to do that is non-declarative memory. These are motor skills, okay? The same thing of, when I describe being able to whistle. So some people can whistle with their fingers. I have spent countless hours on YouTube trying to follow tutorials, right? So this declarative memory, semantic information, put your fingers here, stick your tongue out here. I cannot for the life of me whistle with my fingers, and it drives me crazy. And this is a, motor skill, non-declarative type of memory, and I just have not been able to establish. And so this would be anything that you do that is physical that you can't really describe. Anything perceptual that you can't really describe. Procedural would be like, some of you might be familiar with the star mirror drawing exercise. HM did this. HM was a patient who had his temporal lobes removed and was not able to form long-term memories, new memories. And so he had his long-term memory intact. He was able to remember everything prior to his surgery. But something that he does is he has to draw a star by using a mirror. And this is just something that you have to practice and practice and practice. And he was able to do this particular task because his procedural memory was intact, because it wasn't processed in the temporal lobes. And so this is just another type of memory. Now, we know that sleep specifically is going to benefit hippocampus-dependent memory, which is declarative memory. So if you remember, HM had his hippocampi removed, right? And so he was able to do this procedural memory task because he had his non-declarative memory skills intact. So maybe this is a good way for you to remember how sleep specifically benefits hippocampus-dependent memory. That hippocampus-dependent memory is declarative memory. So that might help you kind of remember this together. Now, if we look at other studies, so for example, Hine in 1914, Rosa Hine was one of the first to demonstrate how sleep strengthens new learning through letter learning. Okay, and so she was able to demonstrate that sleep after learning supports the consolidation of newly learned syllables in long-term memory. And this is evidence for something called the sleep-dependent memory consolidation effect, which is really similar to what we're going to talk about in this consolidated activation theory. We also know that sleep enhances retention, abstraction, as well as emotional memory. And we know, and I said this earlier, that some studies showed that there is some consolidation that does occur during wake, and even sleep-related forgetting, but we're not going to talk about those specific mechanisms because those are kind of a different process. Now, I'm going to pause here and I'm going to pick up on another video because we're about to get into a much more specific neuro-focused explanation of how non-REM and REM sleep works with memory consolidation. So I'm going to pause here and to give you a kind of sectioned out lecture. So we will pick up part 2 after this with this slide.